And I give the call to the member for Bowman.
Deputy Chair, with great pride and enthusiasm, I support this bill which takes a burden off my small business in my electorate. Thousands of small businesses that, no matter how much they wish to support paid parental leave in this country, have been burdened completely unreasonably by the previous government's attempts to make life even more complex for them. Paid parental leave is something like any economic intervention to support our workforce should be brokered through government and should be paid direct to the employer, as other entitlements are. But in this case, what we see with this bill is an ability for employers to pay only where there has been an election to do so and where the employee wishes that payment to be made directly from the employer. This opens up for small business in my electorate the opportunity not to have additional red tape and burden placed upon them, which is what is a recurring message over the last 6 years of this previous government. In this great chamber, we should be able to stand shoulder to shoulder, regardless of what party we are members of, and say that we are united for gender equality, united to see improved labour market participation for women. We should be united around ensuring we have female contributions to our economy, both nationally and globally. We should be united in seeing that the informal and unpaid work done by women should at least be paid at a fair wage, and for those that are getting paid a minimum wage should have every opportunity to be paid a wage that eliminates the gender gap. But of course that is not the case if the highest value you place upon a woman who takes time off to have a child is the minimum wage. By holding to that ridiculous proposition, one actually increases the wage gap for women. And we need to make sure that that is closed, not opened any further. I think it's the view of everyone in this chamber that women should be able to rise to senior positions in their professions and their occupations with minimal hindrance. And most typically that does occur with the interruptions to having children. And we know that the transition since the 70s has been from a single earning family and household to, in most cases now, at least 1.2, if not dual incomes in households. So the real world and the current world now is that second adults are joining the workforce simply to be able to afford what one income could do 3 generations ago. So it's an economic argument that all of the OECD has woken up to, and all of the OECD admit that their calculations for parental leave should not be based on the minimum wage. In fact, there may only be one other economy in the world that does that. For every other economy, they have understood the importance that women can earn a replacement wage that's equated to what they're earning while at work when they take time off to be a parent. And the last thing that we want is small business to be burdened with the additional impost of having to run an administrative program that effectively is nationwide and that it effectively should be brokered by the government that is funding it. We know even as recently as last week at the APEC Women and the Economy Forum strongly reaffirmed this importance with the meeting of 8 of our 10 largest trading partners in Beijing, May 21 to 23. And the APEC ministers, heads of delegations and senior officials identified the limits on female workforce participation as representing at least an $89 billion challenge every year amongst APEC members. And Australia is not an insignificant part of that. We know that in countries like Japan, at least 9% of their GDP is held back because of low female workforce participation. In the US, around about 5%. And in Australia, estimates as recently as early this year indicate that just getting our female workforce participation up to OECD average levels could represent a boost in excess of $10 billion. These are huge figures compared to the cost of providing paid parental leave. Oh yes, funding paid parental leave fairly and equitably actually pays itself, pays that dividend back to the GDP through participation. Now, of course, there's 2 elements to this debate. And the first one is the economic, which I'll go through in great detail. The second is the entitlement side of the debate. But the third, and probably the most colourful, has been for the paragon, the party that argued for decades that they were the shining light for workplace entitlements, suddenly found it utterly impossible to pay a woman what she is worth and found that the minimum wage was good enough for no other reason than the other side of politics came up with the idea. That's right, we have a Labor Party which has appallingly placed this burden on small business to broker this dreadful arrangement, and at the same time will deny the huge majority of working women earning more than the minimum wage to a fair replacement wage when they're raising a child. The greatest challenge we have for closing that gender pay divide, Deputy Speaker, is ensuring the continuity of employment for women in Australia. And the propensity to return to work after having a child is directly linked to retaining a payment which stops if you do not go back to work. It's one thing to leave work and have no payment, or to leave work and have some part payment, but under a system that pays you your replacement wage that continues from before you had a child, it's that realisation after 6 months that it's about to stop unless I go back to work that has that extraordinary pull effect, bringing highly trained, qualified, talented women back to the workforce. And a minimum wage system simply cannot achieve that. Paying a woman a minimum wage is a cheap way out that does not bring women back to the workforce. Now, I'm sure that everyone on the other side of the chamber feels that deep in their heart, Deputy Speaker, but simply because it's not their idea, they are unable to support it. It's one of those rare moments in Australian politics where the Greens, when debating in the way Greens do for means testing, argued that maybe the cut-off should be a little lower. But of course, not the Labor Party, who descended into even more disappointing depths until they reached the nadir of their argument by, during the election campaign, referring to millionaires getting the Prime Minister's paid parental payments through, of course, the administration burden of small business having to do it. And of course, I just thought that would be an interesting opportunity to ask my community if there were in fact any millionaires out there in their late 20s having children, any millionaires out there deciding to have a baby. So we went looking for them but could not find any. Where are those elusive, ephemeral millionaires having children? Somehow they just didn't turn up anywhere that I was looking. I was only looking in an outer metropolitan marginal seat, Deputy Speaker. Perhaps they're living somewhere else. No, perhaps they're in Labor seats. All those millionaires having children. Outrageous, egregious abuse of public payments to see $50,000 being paid to a woman who would earn $50,000 anyway in that time to come back to work and keep earning $50,000 after having a child. What a gross injustice that was, according to Labor. What an injustice. The fact that nearly every other OECD economy does it just that way, of course, don't let any facts from the rest of the OECD spoil a great argument or a great smokescreen. Deputy Speaker, put it on record. Every one of the MPs sitting in these rows on this side of the chamber believe that women in the workforce, just like they get their annual leave, just like they get their sick leave, should be at wage replacement. Everyone on this side. And what we have seen over on the other side of the chamber, let Hansard record the Labor Party's appalling position on what women are worth in the workforce. Believe me, if we take the burden off small business having to administer, as this bill does today, and if we pay women precisely what they're worth for what they earn prior to having a child, for that 6-month period while the WHO recommends they should be bonding with their children, and then pay them to return to work, the continuity of career will mean that for the first time this nation can hope to reduce the gap in superannuation earnings by women at the ends of their career. And it's not a small issue. In fact, Deputy Speaker, we've actually had the Labor Party go on and on about superannuation savings for women. The recognition that they have over $85,000, $87,000 less superannuation to their name by the end of their working life, for the main reason being the interruptions while having children. So why would we not support women in every possible way to return to the labour force? We want the brightest and most productive minds coming back to help us with our skills shortage. We are effectively a high capital, low labour ratio economy. We need every person we can get to reduce the need to import labour. And here is a federal opposition nickel and diming Australian women, saying that no matter what they earn, they're not worth a cent more than the minimum wage. Now, I don't mind a completely open, clear, transparent debate about whether a program can be means tested. I'm no great fan of means testing, But I think we're welcome to have that debate. But no, that's not what was pushed by the other side. It was just the preposterous argument that this money was being cleaned out by millionaires. None we'd ever met, none we'd ever seen, none have ever put their hand up and identified that, no. Most of those high-income earning women either work in large corporations where they're already getting paid parental leave, so there's no real change. Instead of getting it from the company direct, the company pays the extra 1.5% to the government, who pays it to the woman anyway. So no millionaires there scooping any money they don't get already. Or they're working in the offices of judges and parliamentarians and other high-paid public officials. They're high senior public servants. And I don't know too many millionaires there either, to be honest, but they have their public parental leave arrangements at, wait for it, wage replacement. Then we had the preposterous reason for trying to burden small business with this unnecessary imposition. And the realisation was that people in the public sector were able to double dip under Labor's scheme. Good, hard-working people in the private sector, lucky enough to get some low-level minimum wage arrangement by Labor. But what did Labor do when they were in government? They said if you've got an enterprise bargained paid parental scheme, such as staff in this building, you can take that payment and then over and above, go ahead and take a second lot of paid parental leave at the minimum wage. So even right now, we have staff in our own offices taking paid parental leave, not once, but twice, for the same child under the Labor scheme. Now, how does that stand up for equity? Just double dipping 2 lots of paid parental leave. Great if you can get it, not fair if you can't access it. So for the great party of fairness, we see double standards again. I don't mind having a debate about paid parental leave and how much working women deserve, and I have no doubt that someone on the minimum wage will earn the minimum wage while they're on parental leave. So let there be that incentive. Let people seek out the best possible jobs they can, knowing that they will get wage replacement were they to have a child, and secondly, that will be administered not by the small business itself, but by government. The point of today's bill is that employing a woman should never be a risk. Employing a woman should never be something to be avoided. The whole point of this is that small business can say there is already a significant interruption in employing someone who goes off to take parental leave, but they're prepared to brook that because they know that there will be wage replacement funded by predominantly large corporations and delivered by government, and the administrative burden doesn't fall on them. I mean, to concoct a minimum wage scheme that's run by small business would have to be done by a party that's never run a small business. It'd have to be done by a party where no one's ever worked in a small business. And it would have to be done by a party that only thinks a working woman is worth the minimum wage. And I find that frankly embarrassing in the 21st century to share the chamber with such an old-fashioned view. Women are worth more than that. And I think anyone who deals in the community with women returning to work after having a child, they would appreciate 2 things. One is wage replacement for the obvious reason that you can maintain those household commitments that are not easy to change. I mean, you can't just downsize your house for 6 months while you're having a child because I'm being paid the minimum wage. I'll just take a bedroom off the house and reduce the mortgage. I mean, how preposterous. But secondly, the Labor dream of emancipation of working women was to not pay them superannuation under paid parental leave. Where did that come from? No superannuation while you're taking your paid parental leave. What's that? While you're having children, you don't need any superannuation. I mean, what a preposterous argument. Small business to wear the burden, no superannuation, and then finally, as if there was any evidence of expert advice on that side of the chamber, Deputy Speaker, out came the minimum wage, but just for 18 weeks. That's all you get, 18 weeks, and then it all runs out. 18 weeks of the minimum wage. So how on earth have we worked this out on the Labor Party side of politics? Now working women are worth only 18 weeks, despite WHO recommendations to the contrary, at the minimum wage, no superannuation, let small business wear the burden, and if you've got an enterprise bargain agreement in government, you can double dip. Deputy Speaker, I thought there were smart people in politics, and I certainly hope there are smart minds putting together policy. You could not have concocted a more distorted and a more vengeful approach than paying a working woman less than she deserves and less than she earns. I'm ashamed that that policy exists. I feel very, very strongly that small business shouldn't wear that burden, and I support this bill strongly.